I'll just try harder on my own. Thank you very much. I'm Dr. Carol, and thank you for watching this episode. That perspective is something I believe most people struggling with brokenness are tempted to stick with, by and large. I've just got to try harder. But that doesn't work. And if you are one of those people who is wrestling with some variety of brokenness, especially sexual brokenness, how's that working for you? It just doesn't. I have two wonderful guests to talk with me on this program, Joel Warneking and Ben Williams. Joel is a husband, a father to three, and executive director of 423 Communities. He himself has been in recovery now for a number of years. I'll let him tell you his story. And he is passionate about helping people experience the love of God and finding transformation, especially in the areas of their sexual brokenness. Ben Williams is the Next Gen Director at 423 Communities. He also has been through his own story of recovery, and he'll mention that, and is passionate about making this reality of sexual formation in a healthy way available to kids, teens, students. This topic is a big deal for the younger generation in particular. And we start talking about that. You know, you hear pornography is a big deal, but if you're in my generation, what the younger generations now are dealing with when it comes to pornography is not what you and I originally thought of that was in this space. First of all, the internet exploded things, but it's even darker and more addictive now, especially with the personalization that's available, artificial intelligence. We talk a little bit about that. And then what is required to break free from those patterns? We talk about neurobiology and spiritual formation and why you and I and everybody, we were not intended to do this alone. And just from the way we are created as humans, you need other people. What does that look like? Well, Joel Warneking and Ben Williams are right in the thick of this in their ministry as well as what they have walked through themselves. You will enjoy this conversation. When I first came to know about you guys and met you, I believe it was just over a year ago in Colorado Springs at a conference we were both at. And I was just so, first of all, inspired, but also intrigued by the work you're doing with helping people in small group settings, groups over the long haul, find wholeness and freedom from sexual brokenness and become the people God intended them to be. This area of work, it's nothing that I think probably any of us would have chosen to be in this area of ministry, way back when. So a question I often like to start with is, how did you get to this? What brought you to where you are and ministering in this area?
Yeah, when I reached the pinnacle of my sanctification, and I was, I looked at the subject matter of Christian ministry to choose from. I was like, I could be a teaching pastor, a music pastor, evangelist, or a sexual addiction recovery specialist. What should I choose?
Yeah, Joel, right, exactly.
I found 423 about 11 years ago myself. And I was just flat on my face in my compulsive addiction to pornography, masturbation. My compulsive behavior eventually led me to being arrested for indecent exposure, just as the overflow of my compulsive addiction to pornography. And I was on staff at churches. I was doing full-time ministry. And from the ages of 6 or 7, I had built this addictive pattern that was just curiosity at 7, finding the explicit material, but quickly turning into this overwhelming and overriding addiction in my life, where I was learning how to be the good Christian role model preacher guy, and learning how to really hide well in my addiction, and trying to every day navigate the complexities of how do I get rid of this sin that nobody is talking about. And so my life crashed and burned in an exposure disclosure, as you could say. And really 423 was where, for the first time, I found a community that would walk with me and invite me into this grace-based community to truly actually want to know me, where I could be fully known and fully loved, and walk through the complexities of my story, going back into childhood and healing those places of brokenness. So this is where I re-encountered God, re-encountered the grace of God and Jesus, and learned what it meant to walk inside of a community that would point me back to Jesus and heal those places in my relationships. And so was a member for years, a leader. I just grew to love this program. My wife runs our Betrayed Partner program for wives who have been hurt. And 3.5 years ago, I was able to take over as the executive director for 423. And now this is just my response to the gospel, to point people to Christ through their sexual brokenness, whether that's for men, women, families, and youth, to help restore that healthy connection with God and others. I've also gotten the pleasure of meeting Ben along this way, and he's come along to work with 423, and I'm so glad you're here with us, Ben.
Yeah, so happy to be here. Joel, you got to start letting me go first, man. Your story's so hard to follow. No, I'm just kidding. But similarly, I have my own story of struggling with pornography and unwanted sexual behavior. And it was through my years as an adolescent all the way into college of struggling in silence, dealing with so much shame that was crushing, that led me to lie to my accountability, lie to my mentors in church, to try to keep this perfect image and to try to hold together the chaos and brokenness that I was dealing with in my own story and really my own home life growing up. And through COVID-19 and the pandemic while I was in college, it was the perfect place to hide and harbor that addiction. And thankfully for myself, I had a mentor that was committed to walking with me, and he called me out into the light graciously, but honestly. And I was finally able to step into the light, and I wasn't struck down. I wasn't ostracized, but I was met with the genuine grace of God through a community coming around me. And so I got to enter into a recovery program and find the help that I finally needed. And it was through that experience, and then later on getting to do college ministry and eventually work in a care ministry and just local church contexts, that God slowly pieced together a passion, a desire, and a skill set to walk with others, to utilize a story that he's given me, one of brokenness, but to use it to make so much beauty. And that's really what the gospel is. And so that's kind of what has led me to start working with 423 communities.
Beautiful. I'm sure we could park on you guys' stories for the whole episode, and that would be more than fruitful. But one of the reasons that I wanted to have the two of you on our program is for those of you who may have been listening and not, seen my face, I'm an old white woman. I'm almost a senior compared to you guys. Millennial Gen Z, you get to touch in a different way hearts of people in younger generations. When I was growing up, the kinds of porn that, and I did not have early exposure to porn in my own story. There were other things. But, pictures of naked women in a magazine that you'd have to go find under your grandfather's bed, that's not what it is today. And I just like to start with, as you are, whether it's, experiencing stuff in your own stories, or especially what you are seeing in the younger generations now, the level of darkness, the level of accessibility, the level of addiction hooks, how what is happening now gets into young people's brains. Would you guys talk to that for a little bit?
Yeah, Ben, I'd love to hear. You work more exclusively with our youth. I mean, you're working with our communities down to 13, 14 years old through college. So you are at the forefront of what is coming through. So I'd love to hear from your experience first, brother.
Yeah, no, of course. So like Joel said, I get to direct our 423 Next program, which is for the next generation. So we work with youth 13 to 17, and then college age students 18 to around 23. And so, yeah, it's definitely a different world out there today than I'm sure what it was like as you just described growing up. And so students today are met with more access, more availability, and more anonymity, right? Those three A's. And it's affordable, it's free. Those three A's that have made it so destructive for the new generation as they're encountering technology for the first time, right? So even for myself, right, I was exposed to social media at the age of 11 or 12, getting on Instagram. And just from that early age at the time, I didn't know the ways it was affecting me, but it would come to form me as a person, right? The way that I view the world, the way that I view God, and the way I view myself. And so all the way from, Instagram and 2012 at its origin to today of people that now have virtual reality and accessibility to pornography that looks like you're in the room with the person. The digital landscape that teens are growing up in reminds me a lot of the way that Jesus looked out in the crowds in Matthew 11, that he saw them like sheep without a shepherd, harassed and helpless. And in many ways, I think that is the world that teens find themselves in, looking for anything to give them direction, looking for anything to give them a sense of purpose or to numb that lacking of purpose. And in a modern world of endless distraction and ability to numb beyond belief, teens find themselves harassed and helpless.
Yeah, I think what you hit on of that this generation is being extremely pursued in their discipleship of their sexuality. Everything is curated to grab their attention, even from the integration now of explicit nudity and graphic nudity inside of video games. Like some of the most popular video games, are 18 plus rated, trying to hook their attention and hook them into this sexualized culture. And I think one of the most problematic elements that we find inside of our communities is that there is no one willing to step into this space with teens to help them be discipled in their sexuality. Mm-hmm. And so, I'm old enough now that my first exposure was a magazine, a written copy of material. And even then there was no community, there was no program available for me to find support and to find connection. And teens these days don't have anyone that is willing to step into that world with them, so that when they encounter this stuff on social media, and when they encounter the targeted ads through Facebook and Instagram that are sexualized, and when they're just, I even think of the peer pressure culture that exists inside of high school students now, where a lot of young men will report that they started using pornography so that they could be equipped with the knowledge about what sex is, so that they could, engage in the locker room talk and not be seen as, not equipped well in the world of sex among their peers. And so there is just so much targeting them. I think that's what I love about the program that Ben gets to run, is that he is exclusively trying to educate youth workers and parents and youth pastors to be the shepherds and to be the disciplers of this generation, to help them navigate all of those complexities inside of the world that we find ourselves in.
Yeah. One of the things I have heard about is the role of artificial intelligence, which of course is exponential in the online world in every sphere, especially in this sphere. And that's not just, it's more than just targeting it to the things I have looked at before. It is making a digital, quotes, air quotes, relationship appealing, and losing the ability or never having the ability to develop a relationship with live human beings. Neurobiologically, that's among the things that I'm particularly concerned and sad about, the way things are developing now. Is that something you're seeing?
Yeah, to be honest, thankfully, with the guys that I've been working with, no. So thankful for the people that we're working with. But like you mentioned, right, it's becoming more and more prevalent for even elementary age students, middle school students, and especially high school students to make videos of their classmates through artificial intelligence doing sex acts. And it's just the amount of ability and realistic aspects that artificial intelligence brings, it can make your head spin. And I can't imagine the way parents must feel knowing that this is the world that their children are growing up in. Yeah. And so all the way from that to right now, sexting almost feels like it's old news because it is just so prolific. And the ways that technology has enabled students to go through this process of adolescence, which in essence is a time of curiosity, of exploration, of learning how to become a person, which right at its core is a very innocent thing. But because of all of the world and culture's influence and the lack of protection that we have for our children, it has heightened that process to a dangerous degree. And so you see on one side, for someone that grew up in a Christian home or a child growing up in a Christian home, they're surrounded by a culture, by a world that is so saturated with sexual messaging. And like Joel was talking about, that is targeting them, that's trying to take that part of their humanity captive and cultivate it and groom it to be ready to watch pornography, to be ready to even get into sex trafficking through using prostitutes. And that is a sad reality that we find ourselves in today. And then on the flip side of that, they might find themselves in a youth group that never touches that aspect of their humanity, that never engages them in those burning questions that they have. And it makes them feel alone. Or if they do engage them, it's most likely just a message of abstinence, of purity, of weight, and to almost view that aspect of themselves, their sexuality, as something that is broken or disgusting or impure, when in reality, it's one of the most powerful and beautiful and complex parts of our humanity that God has intentionally designed. And so you see a high saturation in the world and then a low maturity level, right? It's super immature. And then you see in the church, low messaging doesn't get talked about, and also a low maturity, I would argue as well. So yeah, that's kind of where teens find themselves in, sadly.
Yeah. I think one...
Go ahead, Joel. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, one of the main ways that we approach kind of problematic or broken sexuality is through the lens of attachment, right? Where you have these core messages about self that have been, because of the world we live in, there is going to be a broken message about self. And you're going to have these broken attachments in relationship. And pornography is one of those things that uniquely fills those attachment wounds. But what you see with AI, and I think the different genres of pornography available, is that as unique as we are as the human race, with all the complexities that make us who we are, there is a synthetic intimacy that I can find through pornography or through AI generated pornography to perfectly fit and soothe the wounds that I have individually. And so what it was before of, you have the one magazine that was passed around the group of 10-year-old boys, that's not filling the attachment wound or the brokenness that's individual to those persons. Now pornography has evolved to the place of uniquely being wired for the individual to fill those needs. And so I think you see a much higher, more elevated rate of addiction because it's not just sexually stimulating. It's not just a dopamine rush from, the illicit form of sex that you're seeing. It's that it's now uniquely wired to soothe those internalized parts of you, which are so much more addictive than just simply erotic material.
Yeah. Powerful stuff that both of you said. And I love how you did connect it to the individual attachment desires, emptiness, that of course, kids and teens or students, they don't understand that at the time. But because it is a powerful hook, the pull is so strong. That's also a great segue into the other big topic that I wanted to talk about is how do we get out of this mess? We could probably talk for 2 hours or 10 hours about the problem. And even in the church, so many find I don't have anybody to talk to about this. You all, as I am, are aware of the recent study by Barna and Pure Desire, the high rates in the church of struggles with pornography, including one stat that stands out to me, 84% said they have nobody to help them with this. They want help to get out of this quagmire and don't have anybody to help with it. You guys are trying to and are addressing that. In the small group model that you are using and finding just such help with that you guys have experienced for yourselves, one of the things that you were just talking about in the problem relates so directly to what solution needs to be brought and that you are bringing, and that's the whole attachment piece, the neurobiology. The doctor part of me kind of geeks out on all of that. And I'd love you to talk a bit about why the group is such an important thing, even neurobiologically, that simply saying, okay, porn is bad, don't watch porn. If I've, kind of gotten hooked on that, trying harder by myself, it's not going to work. So why is the group, and what does neurobiology have to say about why that's such a powerful way to find freedom?
Yeah, I think that I geek out with that as well. Like I love diving into it. So you just opened a can of worms, Carol.
Yeah. Be careful what you wish for.
Be careful what you wish for. Traditionally, I think the church and a lot of recovery has focused on trying to eliminate bad behavior. I remember purity culture, and it was just don't do bad things. Yes. Save it for when you're married, and then you can do good things that once were bad. It was confusing messaging. But what we see with a lot of our people is that they are good people that have good core desires within them that have been disordered and turned away through those broken pieces of attachment. And so there is no other place, I think, that we were created for to work out those things than inside of a community. I think you see that from a biblical model. You see that from being created in the image of God, that we are meant to do this inside of relationship. And so we at 423 we approach this problematic sexual behavior through two different components, and I'll run through them really quickly. The first is that there is a neurochemical hijacking of the brain. When you see erotic material and it stimulates the brain and all the rush of the neurochemicals through the whole excitement period, even to the relapse or the prolapse at the end, all of those chemicals create an addictive cycle in the brain and the body. Rewires the neural pathways to when I experience this, I go this direction, I receive this reward. Now I have this addictive pattern. There's this addictive pattern that needs to be addressed. Yep. This part of the behavior needs to be crushed. It needs to be boundaries and external limiters and reframed and behavioral training to get away from the addiction. Most of the church and a lot of recovery ministries focus on this aspect. The other aspect, and this is probably where the majority of the problematic addictive process happens, is in what we call the compulsion away from internalized pain. These are those core messages about self. This is that core desire to be seen, longed after, sought after, touched, healthy physical embrace, where this was not met through even healthy family systems. When there is that broken attachment, and there is that broken messaging inside of self, it creates an internalized wound that then causes us to need to soothe for it, right? This part of the process, this part needs to be loved. This part needs compassion and needs curiosity. And the best way to see ourselves clearly and through that lens is through the eyes of another person. And so where we see the small group community come in, that's why we're called 423 communities, is that when you step into a room of 8 to 10 other people who are all there for the same purpose of being seen, known, and loved inside of their sexual behavior, inside of their broken sexual behavior, and you bring out those elements of the self that have been broken, wounded, those traumatic memories from 6, 7 years old of a family separation and the pain and the trauma that you experienced in that moment at 7 years old. When I bring this part of my addictive process, my traumatic process into the room with you, and I am seen, known, and loved and walked with all the complexities that make me, me. I mean, you can see, like, if you're familiar with Kurt Thompson's work,
Yes.
right, with confessional communities,
Yes.
love it, that when I am seen and I am reflected back with love and compassion and curiosity, those parts of that neural network begin to rewire. That broken attachment to my father at 7 years old begins to rewire in the presence of another loving human. And when you have 8 to 10 other eyes that are seeing you as you're processing through those complexities of that internalized pain, the body and the brain begin to respond in a powerful way. Because if you don't first heal those internalized messages of pain and shame, that addictive process is never going to go away. You can white knuckle it, you can suppress it, you can push it away, but it will come back until this part of that process has been worked through and dealt with. And so that kind of complexity of being in that group where you're seen, known, and loved, and what that tells the brain, that it's safe, that it's okay to heal, it's okay to process through those things, is the core formation of what we do across all of our spaces.
Friends, if you've been listening or watching and that didn't make sense to you, go back and rewatch, re-listen to the last 5 minutes. That was a masterclass and what becoming whole needs to look like. Thank you, Joel. It's much more than behavior management or sin management. To use language I have sometimes talked about in this arena, the first segment, you need to stop digging the ruts deeper. There are deep ruts in your brain, the old brain pathways. Yes, you need boundaries and help to stop making those ruts deeper. But if you don't build new brain pathways, your brain is going to keep going back to that old stuff. You need new brain pathways to heal the intimacy disorder. I think so much, maybe all that we're talking about is really an intimacy disorder, which gets us right back to how this relates to God himself and who we as humans were originally created to be, is to be intimate with him, and how evil has sidetracked us in all kinds of broken ways of intimacy, and to get back to the capacity for intimacy, first of all, wholeness in myself, not separated from the parts of me, able to be intimate with a few other humans, with my spouse if I'm married, and most importantly, with God. That's really the plan of salvation, isn't it?
Amen.
Yeah. So true. So true. I love that we're digging into that. And even to come back to the idea with youth and young adults, I think we can bash on the world that they're growing up in and the disadvantage they may even have whenever we talk about the teen brain, of the prefrontal cortex not being fully formed and their lacking ability to make fully rational decisions. But in reality, there's so much hope in the way God has designed our brains and our bodies. And though they face such a difficult world ahead of them, if they are placed in a community where they can bring those wounds that we've mentioned, those attachment issues that are riddled with shame, that are riddled with isolation, and they can actually bring that into a community that embodies the love of God, right? The literal body of Christ. That's who the church is. And whenever we're able to emulate his character to one another, to meet each other with empathy and validate the difficult issues that we've faced, and also faithfully walk alongside each other, it can begin to rewrite those shame messages and take those negative narratives and now say, it's actually safe to be in community. It's actually great to be known, instead of the opposite. And whenever you do that as a 15, 16, 17-year-old, that's going to set you up for the rest of your life to become more and more like Christ, way better than, whenever those shame messages are already so deeply ingrained as a 40-year-old, a 50-year-old. And so that's where I find so much hope and optimism in the way God has designed our brains and the way that we are formed as people.
Yeah. I didn't give you guys a heads up about this question, but are there any anonymous kinds of stories, or non-anonymous if you have, just what happens to people when they join one of these communities and stick with it? Let me be clear, these brain pathways don't heal, to use my language, in, a day, 2, 3, a week. It takes a process. Yeah. What does that look like? In any vignettes or stories that you're able to share?
Yeah. I mean, even in my own story, right? Because this is where I found healing. It doesn't have to be anonymous then. I think initially there's so much, it's one of my favorite moments in a group, is sitting in there and welcoming a new man into a group. And you get to see the burden of shame, where they walk in and they're carrying all of this pain, all of this shame from being hidden for so long. And then they get to be seen for the first time, and they share a little bit of their story. And just the breath that comes into their lungs and the lifting of their face. And as they know that they're surrounded by a bunch of safe, competent men in the room who are all sharing their stories. And so there's this initial refresher where the brain says, wow, it's safe to come out into the light. This feels so good to be seen. And that brings some immediate alleviation from the problematic behaviors. Right. That can carry for a few times. Sorry, a mosquito's trying to get me. That can carry for a few weeks into that process where they're so excited and they're making new revelations, and they get that initial kind of sobriety and they're making connections. And then there's about an 18-month long haul, right? This is where they're unpacking all of these complexities in their family of origin, and they're learning about their attachment style, and they're learning about their internal family wounds, and all these different pieces kind of build over this 18-month journey. I see a pretty significant pivot in the recovery journey at about 18 months. I think that's where the brain is starting to reform some of those neural pathways. Some of those unhealthy behaviors are beginning to fall off. And then from about that time is either when a man decides to finish the last 20%, last 30% of the recovery journey. And a lot of men will bail at, the 10-month, hey, I went through the book with you and I'm done. I'm going to go back to my normal pattern of life. Or, hey, I went through the course once, went through it twice, and I'm kind of done. There's a reason why we sit with men for as long as they need, whether that's 18 months to 15 years. You can be in a healthy community for your growth and your health. Then about 18 months to 3 years is where we really see that more substantial sobriety. They're beginning to grow in their ability to have intimacy and empathy and connection, and really starting to form the ability to have healthy attachment with other people. I think that's pretty on par with most clinical models, 3 to 5 years to help rewire the entire system towards health. I think we see that pretty consistently. I think my pivot point was about 18 months. And then about year 3, it was like, oh, I just feel like my brain unlocked. I feel like a different person. My personality is opening up, and my executive function is starting to flourish, and I can see clearly. And I think that's pretty typical of that process. And so there's always an encouragement. Maybe that's an encouragement for someone listening today. If you just started recovery, or if you don't know if there is hope or health or restoration available for you, I can almost guarantee you that you can find healing from this problematic behavior. There is hope, there is restoration available, but it is not an easy journey. That's why you need others to come alongside you. You need to be running this race with other people, whether that's through a small group community like 423, whether that's with individual coaches, counselors, intensive programs. Carol, I know that you have a lot of different offerings within your program and some of our other friends in this ministry. There is an entire recovery community here that is available to help walk with people wherever they find themselves in their problematic sexual behaviors and the impacts thereof.
That is so good, Joel. It reminds me, our friend Kurt Thompson, you mentioned him, I'll mention him again, who likes to say something like, humans can do very hard things if they don't have to do it alone. Our brains can handle a lot if we're not alone. And that's among the reasons the kinds of communities that you are fostering are so important. I think it might be meaningful to some of our listeners to understand also that you work with churches. This isn't something that we're out here doing our own thing. This is part of the body of Christ. Would you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, it is one of our main missions to equip every church. I have big goals, right? Every church in the world to have a healthy recovery community. This needs to be more than simply a curriculum. This needs to be more than a book. This needs to be a healthy community established within the context of the local body of Christ. And so one of our goals is to equip every church that we can come in contact with, where we essentially establish the entire program, onboard every member, train leaders, run the organizational side of that for life. And so at our best, we become essentially adjunct recovery care pastors with the church, where we are walking alongside pastors in those intricate moments of repair and walking with families as they wrestle with these problems, helping them find hope, health, and healing. And so we are honored to be partnered with churches all across the country, just launched some groups in Canada, and are slowly pushing to every space that we can to help create a healthy space for people to find care. So we'd love to connect with anyone who would want to start a group.
Awesome. I know I suggested a gentleman talk with you, Joel, which you did. And what he reported to me is you've talked to him about helping start a group at his church. That's what you do. Ben, maybe a question for you. I'm sure we have a lot of, parents or perhaps leaders who have young people that they love and care for. And just a word, because I think we probably have more of them than we have, teens and students themselves listening, although there's teens or students, reach out to 423 communities. But Ben, what might you say to those who love and care for those young people?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, don't do it alone. Even the teens that are in our program, right? They need a community to walk with them to overcome their unwanted sexual behaviors. And you as parents, you need a community likewise to walk with you through the difficulties of parenthood, to evaluate your own story around your sexuality growing up, and to overcome the shame you may be projecting onto your own teens, and especially pastors too, to maybe work through your own shame narratives and stories, and then to be equipped to talk about this difficult subject and to learn how to create a community, an atmosphere that is based on the grace of God. And that's what students get to experience when they enter into. And so we get the privilege of creating those communities for parents, of equipping pastors, of training volunteers, of raising up people and walking alongside them to create those spaces where healing can happen. And so that's what I love about 423 communities is, we believe that change happens through relationships, not just through curriculum, not just through a book. And you see that through the life of Jesus. He didn't write a book. That wasn't his ministry strategy. But we get to see that his strategy was picking 12 and then 3. And then from that, obviously the entire world has changed. And so we hope to model after that and to walk alongside people every step of the way.
Mm. Beautiful. We're going to certainly have links in the show notes if you're listening, under this video if you're watching. But would you just, however you want to do this, just invite people to check you out and connect with you?
Yeah. If you want to connect to us, 423communities.org, follow us, our podcast, reach out to us. Joel at 423communities.org would love to get you connected to any one of our programs and walk with you however we are able. That's our greatest honor.
Mm. Thank you both. One thing I'm not sure we were explicit about, your initial groups, were for men. You have programs for wives who have been harmed by this, and now you're helping women too, and getting groups for women started. So just many, many blessings to you. Ben, Joel, this has been just wonderful. I'm sure that I and you all, we're going to be talking more. This is wonderful. Thanks be to God. But many blessings to you and your work.
Yeah, Carol, thank you so much for having us. And thank you for all the work that you do in this area. There's not enough people doing this work. And so blessings to you as well, friend.
Yeah, thanks for having us on.
Thank you so much. Do check out 423 Communities. That's one of the things I care deeply about, is helping people find the places to connect to heal the intimacy disorder. That's my words. But more than stopping the bad stuff, although that's critically important, how do you develop the capacity for the new stuff, the new brain pathways, the new kinds of connections, wholeness in yourself, connection with a few other healthy believers, connection with God? 423 Communities has been doing this for quite a while, and check them out. It's good stuff. Joel also briefly mentioned some of the things that we are doing at Dr. Carroll Ministries in this particular arena. I work with men and women and couples regularly, every week, in an individual coaching basis, helping process through these kinds of issues. And I would be honored to hear from you. Under this video is a link to more information about my individual coaching. And then the thing I'm most excited about that we are doing now is small group intensives. You need both. I fully believe this. You need an intensive experience, many people do, to kind of clear away some of the rubble and find some level of healing and goodness. And God can do dramatic things in this kind of a setting. We just finished one a little over a week ago. And I was blown away by what God did in opening some of those deep places, especially in two of the ladies' hearts. And then you also need a group. I think the combination is most powerful. You get some of that intensive work, like at one of our intensives, and then connect with a group, such as at 423 Communities. We have a link under this video to more information about our intensives programs. Beautiful location here in Central Texas, really a premium experience. Check that out. I would also love to hear from you individually. If you have a question or a comment, you can leave a comment under this video. I read every one, and if I can offer something helpful, I comment. You can also leave me a confidential message at the contact page on our website at drcarrollministries.com. That message is confidential. It comes right to me. I respond personally, and I would love to hear from you. I want to thank you for being part of our family here on YouTube. And I'd invite you to make sure you're subscribed so you get our information every time we put something up. And then check out the links so you can connect with us more deeply in some of these other ways as well. And until next time, God bless you.